Sup guys, I'm Kel, Red Zone MTG, and today I have another Oathbreaker deck strategy video. As you may have already guessed, today's video is covering Garruk Relentless and his signature spell, Maelstrom Pulse. And we're going to talk about Maelstrom Pulse a little bit later because you have some options in regards to the signature spell. But Garruk Relentless is a really sweet planeswalker. This is basically like a mid-range rock style deck with a little bit of a, not a wombo combo, but a big Cthulhu-y combo. We'll talk about that when the time comes. But without further ado, let's start talking about the deck, starting with good old Garruk here. So Garruk Relentless is actually a flip planeswalker. I think he's one of the first ones to ever do that. He might be the first one to actually do that. He's a 4-drop, he costs 3 of any and a green, he has 3 loyalty. Planeswalker Garruk, he says, when Garruk Relentless has 2 or fewer loyalty counters, transform him. He has a 0 ability where he deals 3 damage to a creature, and then that creature deals damage equal to its power to him. So he kind of acts like as a low grade removal, which is pretty cool. You can take apart any you can kill any low drops or just kind of like weaker dudes, and he also has another 0. You get to put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield. You have a lot of options when it comes to your wolf tokens, but I would highly recommend either Fluffy Boy here or Armored Boy. Yes, they are both very good boys. His transformed side is Garruk the Veil Cursed, and he now has 3 abilities. His +1 creates a 1/1 black wolf with Death Touch. As you can see here, not as cute as the other guys, but still pretty potent. He has a -1 of sacrifice a creature. If you do, search your library for a creature, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library, which is pretty sweet, so you can kind of tutor for dudes. He has a -3 of creatures you control gain trample and get +X until end of turn, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. And our deck basically synergizes kind of with all of these here. We definitely want to search our deck for creatures. We can pump up all of our dudes. We do have a big, massive, crater-sized pump in the deck. And creating 1/1s with Death Touch is pretty good. Garruk is actually just an all-around solid card. He creates wolves, he can kill dudes, he can search your deck for stuff. Just a really, really solid rock-type card. Our signature spell here is Maelstrom Pulse, and you may or may not be able to actually read the name here. It is a sorcery that costs 1 of any, a black and a green, and it says destroy target non-land permanent and all other permanents with the same name as that permanent. You do have some leeway here. There are some other spells on the deck you can run as your signature spell, but I really like Maelstrom Pulse because it basically just hits anything, and if your opponent is doing a like go wide token strategy, it'll kill all of the tokens, which is pretty sweet. But like I said, you can definitely run something else instead of Maelstrom Pulse, and if you do, I would still put Maelstrom Pulse in the deck, in the 58 instead. Alright, let's start talking about the deck. We're going to kick it off with our ramp creatures. But we have Fyndhorn Elves, 1-drop ramp elf, Elvish Mystic, 1-drop ramp elf. You can kind of see a pattern here. Birds of Paradise, 1-drop ramp birds. We have Elves of Deep Shadow, one of my favorite cards as a kid. Absolutely gorgeous artwork, but it is a 1-drop ramp elf that adds black mana and deals 1 damage to us, but I mean, I gotta have the Elves of Deep Shadow. We have more 1-drop ramp elves with old school Llanowar elves here. And then we have a 2-drop ramp plant. Still pretty good. She's a little bit better. Well, I don't want to say better than the other ones, but she's pretty solid because she's a 0/3. She can block. She also has hexproof, so they can't, bolt the bird, as it were. And then we also run Selvala, Heart of the Wilds, who doubles as a card advantage card and a ramp card. This card is ridiculous. It's worth like $50, which is absurd. So if you don't have one of these, I don't blame you. You can run something else instead of this. She is a 2/3 Elf Scout for 1 of any and 2 green. She says whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller, so your opponents can benefit from this too, may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power. And we do have some pretty big boys in the deck. And she also says green, tap it, add X mana in any combination of colors to your mana pool, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Pretty good. She ramps us, she draws us cards. I'm not sure if it's worth that $50 price tag, but I have one, so she definitely goes in the deck. Next up, we have some graveyard hate with Deathrite Shaman and Scavenging Ooze. Deathrite Shaman is a 1/2 for 1 of either a black or a green Elf Shaman. You can tap him and exile a land card from any graveyard and add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So I didn't include him in the ramp section because we're not running any fetch lands, mostly because I have 11 commander decks and going on 5 Oathbreaker decks, and I don't have a lot of fetches to spare but we can still exile lands from our opponent's graveyards, which is pretty cool. We can also exile instant and sorcery cards from any graveyard and make each opponent lose 2 life, which is pretty sweet. Or we can exile creatures from any graveyard and we gain 2 life. So he just kind of hoses over graveyards. Really, really solid. Graveyard strategies are pretty popular, so Deathrite Shaman is a pretty auto-include in my opinion. And then we have Scavenging Ooze for similar reasons. It's a 2/2 ooze for 1 of any and a green, and we can pay a green and exile a card from a graveyard, and if it was a creature, it gets +1/+1 and we gain a life, which is pretty sweet. Next up I have Fauna Shaman, a 2/2 elf shaman for 1 of any and a green. We can pay a green and tap it and discard a creature, and search our library for a creature and put it into our hand. Pretty good. Sometimes we do want creatures in our graveyard, so we can reanimate them with a couple of our reanimate spells, or we can pitch just like a 1-drop mana dork and fetch up something more impactful. I do like this card quite a bit. There may be something else you could put instead of this, but I like the Fauna Shaman. Next up we have some of our 2-drop big boys with Grim Flayer and Tarmogoyf. Grim Flayer is a 2/2 with trample, which is kind of weird, but he gets bigger. For 1 green and a black, and he says, whenever Grim Flayer deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put any number of them into your graveyard, and put the rest back on top in any order. Which is pretty sweet. We get to kind of select the next couple of cards on the top of our deck. We can put stuff in our graveyard if we need to. Just a pretty solid card. And he also has Delirium. Grim Flayer gets +2/+2 as long as there are 4 or more card types among cards in our graveyard. So he can be a 4/4 with trample for 2, which is pretty solid. Then we have the iconic Tarmogoyf. This dude is a pretty big beating in this format. Not as good in Commander, but in Oathbreaker he's pretty good because people only have 20 health. He's a creature Lurgoyf for 1 of any and a green, and it says Tarmogoyf's power is equal to the number of card types among cards in all graveyards, and its toughness is equal to that number +1, and we are playing a multiplayer format, so, it can easily be a 4/5 in, Modern or whatever pretty easily, but in a multiplayer format, you can see him quite easily be a 4/5, 5/6, that kind of stuff. For only 2 mana, pretty solid card. Another really sweet and efficient mid-rangey card is Thrun the Last Troll. He's a 4/4 Troll Shaman for 2 of any and 2 green. He cannot be countered. He cannot be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. He basically has hexproof. And he has a regeneration ability for 1 of any and a green. He's very, very good against control decks, and in particular blue control decks. And as a 4/4 regenerator, just a really, really solid threat. And if your opponents are playing with, Mana Drain or whatever as their signature spell, Thrun is a really good counter to that. Next up we have Ronis, the Indomitable. He's just also a pretty good beater, Death Touch, indestructible, 5/5 for only 3. However, he can't attack or block unless you control another creature with power 4 or greater. But luckily, we've got stuff like, Thrun, we got Tarmogoyf, so, we'll probably have a creature power 4 or greater. But he also has another ability, which I think is actually very important. You can pay 2 of any and a green and give another creature +2/+0 and trample until end of turn. And that effect is actually quite important for our deck because not a lot of our dudes have trample. Tarmogoyf doesn't have trample, Thrun doesn't have trample, and our big Cthulhu monster at the end of the video also does not have trample. So giving him trample is actually very, very sweet. And for only 3 mana, pretty solid card. Next up we have Vampire Hexmage. This is an omen of things to come, but I do think this card is very, very good in Oathbreaker, even if you're not using it as a combo piece. It's a 2/1 first strike for 2 black, and it says sacrifice Vampire Hexmage, remove all counters from target permanent. So, we do have a combo with this in the deck. We'll talk about that a little bit later. If you're in the know, you probably already know what I'm talking about. But you can remove all counters from Planeswalkers too, so this card acts as kind of like a Planeswalker removal as well, which is pretty sweet. So dual purpose, it's good even outside the combo. I love Vampire Hexmage in this format. Next up we have Tireless Tracker, an incredibly good value card. It's a 3/2 for 2 of any and a green, human scout. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, investigate. And what investigate does is it creates a colorless clue artifact token. And this is what one of those tokens looks like. It is, just an artifact. You can pay 2 and sack it and then draw a card. If you have the full art unstable ones, I would recommend using these because they are super, super sweet. But it also says whenever you sacrifice a clue, you get a 1/1 counter on Tireless Tracker. Just a really good, solid value engine, and we can use those clues with another card in the deck. It's not a big combo, but it's still pretty good. Next up, we have a couple value creatures, starting with Eternal Witness. If you couldn't tell, I kind of like the art on this card, but what Eternal Witness actually is, if it can get in focus, 2/1, when it enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So you just basically get any card back from your graveyard. It's a 3-drop, 1 of any 2 green, Human Shaman. Fantastic card. You can get back literally anything you want. Just really, really good. And then we also run God Eternal Bantu. This is one of the cards I'm testing out. I'm not entirely sure how good he is, but he's been pretty good so far. He's a 5/6 zombie god. I said he, I think it's a she. 5/6 zombie god with menace for 3 of any and 2 black. It says when God Eternal Bantu enters the battlefield, sacrifice any number of permanents or other permanents, then draw that many cards. So all of those clues that we made, which is pretty good, just kind of makes the clues a little bit cheaper. And we can also sacrifice all of our little mana dorks that we don't need anymore. And it also says when God Eternal Bantu dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, you may put it on top of its owner's library 3rd from the top. So it's really hard to get rid of. It's just kind of like inevitability that gives us card advantage. It's not super great, but I think it's pretty good, and I'm still testing it out, and so far, so far so good. Next up, we have the biggest beaters of the deck. This is our absolute top end. We're going to kick it off with Avenger of Zendikar and Craterhoof Behemoth. Avenger of Zendikar is a 5/5 elemental for 5 of any and 2 green. When it enters the battlefield, you put a 0/1 plant into the battlefield for each land you control, and you're going to need a lot of these plant tokens. And it also says landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. So you can kind of pump up your plant army. You can also use, Bantu here to sack those plants and draw some cards. Avenger of Zendikar is a pretty sweet card and, pretty popular in Commander, honestly. Craterhoof Behemoth really combos well with the Avenger. 5/5 with haste, beast for 5 of any and triple green. It says when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain trample and +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. You can play this rampant out with all of our little mana dorks, and they all become huge threats. There's a reason Craterhoof is such an iconic card. So yeah, easy include in the deck. And then we have our Praetors. We're running Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger, and Sheoldred Whispering One. These guys are pretty good in the long game. They're not like one-shot, I'm going to kill you cards, kind of like the Craterhoof or the Avenger, but they're still really good. Sheoldred is a 6/6 Praetor with Swamp Walk, which is kind of weird, but for 5 of any and 2 black. At the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Pretty good. And it says at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature. So, just fantastic card. We're playing a lot of ramp, as you saw, so it's not too hard to get Sheoldred out. And then we have Vorinclex, and I know a lot of people hate this card because it's so annoying. It is a 7/6 Trample Praetor for 6 of any and 2 green, and he says, whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. So he basically doubles all of your land-based mana. And then he also says, whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, that land doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So getting Vorinclex out pretty early lets us basically power through the rest of our deck. He is a really annoying card. I know a lot of people don't like him because of that unfun lands don't untap ability, but, he's good. So that's it with the creatures. Let's start talking about the rest of the deck. I do run Thoughtseize and Collective Brutality. I'm going to kind of clump these cards in together because they both discard, but the Collective Brutality does a little bit more than that. Thoughtseize, iconic black card. For 1 black mana, sorcery. Target player reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards a card, and then you lose 2 life. In the multiplayer format, it's not quite as good, as a 1v1, but it's still really, really good. It kind of helps us make sure that we can do what we want to do. You Thoughtseize the blue player right before you play your Craterhoof or something like that. And then we also have Collective Brutality. This card is pretty sweet. Sorcery for 1 of any and a black. It has Escalate, discard a card, and you can pay this cost for each mode chosen beyond the first. So it says choose 1 or more, and if you want to choose more than 1, you have to discard a card for each one you choose. It says target opponent reveals his or her hand, you choose an instant or sorcery card from it, that player discards the card, or target creature gains -2/-2 until end of turn, or target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So, you can kill a dude, make your opponent discard a card, or all 3 of them. It's pretty good. Next up, we have our removal suite, and we are packing some of the best removal ever printed, outside of white. This is Abrupt Decay. It's an instant for 1 black, 1 green. It cannot be countered, which is excellent. And it says destroy target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less. So this card is a pretty good one for your signature spell if you don't want to run Maelstrom Pulse, and if your opponents are playing with a lot of counter magic. Next up, we have Assassin's Trophy, another contender for signature spell. This is an instant for 1 black and 1 green. It says destroy target permanent an opponent controls. Its controller may search their library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield, and shuffle it. I didn't have this as the signature spell just because I don't like ramping a specific player in a multiplayer format. Sometimes you can kill a threat, but you can put them pretty far ahead by, giving them more resources. But I do think this card is still really good, and you could possibly put this as your signature spell. Next up, we have Death Sprout. This is one I'm testing out for more of the Spark. First of all, absolutely awesome art. Seb McKinnon is a killer artist. He actually did the art for the Assassin's Trophy as well, but Death Sprout it's pretty sweet. Anyway, it's an instant for 1 of any, 2 black and a green, so it's a 4-drop. Destroy target creature, so it's more limited than the other ones, but you get to search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Really sweet, so kill a dude and ramp you. So far, I think Death Sprout is pretty solid. And then we also run Pernicious Deed, one of my favorite cards of all time. It's an enchantment for 1 of any, a black and a green, and it says, pay X, sacrifice Pernicious Deed, destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with a converted mana cost X or less. Notably, it doesn't mention Planeswalkers because, this was made before Planeswalkers were a thing, but Pernicious Deed is still an excellent card. Really good board wipe, and if you have ways to get it back, just excellent. Get it back with the Eternal Witness or something like that. Next up, we have some tutors, starting off with Crop Rotation. This is an instant for 1 green mana. It says, as an additional cost to cast Crop Rotation, sack a land, and then you get to search your library for any land card and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. And we have some really good land cards that we are going to search for. We'll talk about those when the time comes, but I actually consider this as my signature spell if I wanted to go with a more land-centric strategy, but I went for a more like Rocket-style deck with a lot of different avenues, with our creatures and our discard and our removal, instead of going all in, but it's still fantastic. Then we have Demonic Tutor. It's Demonic Tutor. You'll probably see me run this in any black deck that I make. This one is an old school revised edition 1. Search our library for any card, shuffle our library for only 2 mana. Really, really good. And then we have Diabolic Intent, almost as good as Demonic Tutor. Same exact thing, except we have to sacrifice a creature as an additional cost. But, we can sack, a plant token if it's super late game, or we can sack just a mana dork or whatever. Just really, really solid card. Next up, we have some card advantage cards, starting with Sylvan Library. It costs 1 of any and a green, and it's an enchantment, and it has a giant wall of kind of complicated text. Basically, what it does is during your draw step, you draw 2 additional cards, and then you can put any number of those cards back on top of the deck. So you kind of get to choose which card you want to draw from the top 3, or you can pay for life for each additional card you want past the first one. It's kind of a complicated card, but once you actually play with it, it's not too bad. Just, when you draw 3 cards, look at them, and then just choose the one you want to put in your hand and then put the other 2 back on top. Or you can, like I said, pay for life for each one that you want to keep. So, yeah. Really, really good. Really, really good effect for only 2 mana. Then we have Phyrexian Arena, another, commander staple. It's a 3-drop enchantment for 1 of any 2 black. It says, at the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card and lose a life. Just, in a long game, it's very, very good. But it's not really good if it's not a long game. What is good for a short game? Night's Whisper. This is just sorcery for 1 of any and a black, and it just says you lose 2 life and you draw 2 cards for only 2 mana. Pretty good. In the short run, a lot better than Phyrexian Arena, but if you have a long game, Phyrexian Arena is a little bit better. And finally, for the non-land cards, we have the best Reanimator spells ever made with Reanimate and Animate Dead here. So what Reanimate does, it's a sorcery for 1 black. Put target creature card from any graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and then you lose life equal to its converted mana cost. Definitely have to be careful about, not killing yourself with this, but just really, really solid. You can just get back a Tarmogoyf and only lose 2 life, or you can get back, one of your crazy Praetors or something like that. It's just a lot of, you have a lot of range for the usefulness of this card. And then we have Animate Dead, which is one of my favorite cards ever. I know I've said that a lot, but there's a lot of really cool cards in this deck. It's an enchant creature. Well, it says enchant dead creature. Basically, what it does has a lot of really old, weird text here. For only 2, 1 of any and a black, you play this, you get to pick any creature in any graveyard, you put it into the battlefield, this card enchants it, it gets -1, -0, and then when Animate Dead leaves the field, the creature dies. So, that's basically what it does. Classic, iconic card. And we come to one of my favorite parts of the deck with Dark Depths It's easily one of my favorite lands of all time. What it is, it's a legendary snow land. It says Dark Depths enters the battlefield with 10 ice counters on it. You can pay 3 mana and remove an ice counter from it. And when it has no more ice counters, you sack it and then create Merit Lage, a legendary 2020 black avatar with flying and indestructible. So you make just this giant Cthulhu monster, the biggest creature in Magic ever, other than, you know, unstable and unhinged and all that kind of stuff. But flying, indestructible, like I said, with Ronis, you can give this trample. Just an amazing card. But, you know, like, oh, it doesn't make mana, which is kind of a downside. And also, it, you know, 10 ice counters and you have to pay 3? That's like 30 mana. That's a lot. Well, you know, we could just play Vampire Hexmage, like I talked about before, sack it and remove all the counters and just get a 20/20 for basically free, which is pretty good. Or we can use Thespian Stage, which is a land that can tap for colorless mana. Or you can pay 2 and tap it and have it become a copy of target land, except it has this ability. What you do is you copy Dark Depths, and with Legend rule, you will kill this Dark Depths, it'll go away, and then this one, since you copied it, does not come into play with the counters, you immediately sacrifice it, and it makes a Merit Lodge token. It's just like a really cool, fun, alternate win condition in the deck. You know we are playing a rock-style deck, so you really don't have to go all in on Dark Depths, but it's still a really cool option if you need it. Also, I run a Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, which is a legendary land, and it turns each land into a swamp, in addition to its other land types, which makes it so you can tap Dark Depths for mana. So it's not completely useless if you don't have any of your other combo pieces. Alright, let's start talking about the rest of the deck with Blast Zone. This is a new card from War of the Spark, and I think it's a pretty good one. When it enters the battlefield, you put a charge counter on it. You can tap it and add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. You can tap X, tap it, and put X charge counters on it. And you can pay 3 and tap it and sacrifice it and destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Blast Zone. So it's a land that can kill stuff. That's basically all I need to know. It's really sweet. It's not X or less like Pernicious Deed, but it's still really, really sweet. And once again, we can search it up with Crop Rotation, which is why I considered Crop Rotation as my signature spell. Then I run Forge of Heroes. I consider this a staple for Oathbreaker. You can tap it in a colorless, or you can tap it and give your Oathbreaker an additional loyalty counter if it came into the battlefield this turn. Just fantastic card. Once again, I consider it a staple for Oathbreaker. Next up, I have Phyrexian Tower. Legendary land. You can tap it and add 1 colorless. You can tap it and sack creature to add 2 black. Just really solid. If your opponent's trying to gain control of one of your dudes, you can just sack it with this. Or you can just sack your mana dorks after you tap them to add even more mana to ramp out, you know, Shale Dread or whatever. Just another really, really solid card. Command Tower is a pretty obvious one. Just adds 1 of any mana that we need. Hissing Quagmire is very similar, but it comes into the battlefield tapped. Or we can pay a mana of any color, a black and a green, to turn it into a 2/2 with Death Touch, which is pretty sweet. And then we have Overgrown Tomb. It's our, you know, on-color shock land. We have Llanowar Waste, our on-color pain land. Woodland Cemetery, our on-color check land. I think that's what they're called. Blooming Marsh, our on-color fast land. Some of these land jargon I'm not still 100% sure on, but I think it's a fast land. Temple of Malady, or Temple of Malady, our on-color scry land. Fantastic. Comes into play tapped, but being able to scry is still pretty sweet. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 forests and 3 swamps. And I just want to say thank you guys very much for watching. I do want to give the creators of Oathbreaker a huge shout out here. They are the Weird Cards Charitable Club and Magikids. They do run a charitable non-profit and will be running a fundraiser soon, or maybe it's going on right now. But in any case, I will have links in the description down below to the Weird Cards Charitable Club, to Magikids, and to the fundraiser if it's going on right now. I highly suggest you guys check them out. They're awesome people, and they invented this awesome format. I really dig it quite a bit, and I honestly legitimately think it's definitely worth your time. Thanks again for watching, guys. Stay tuned for some more Oathbreaker content, and just Magic content in general, coming up in the future. I do have a mono-white Oathbreaker deck coming. I'm going to be doing a Narset deck. I kind of want to make a Nicol Bolas Dragon God deck. I got a lot of stuff planned, so just stay tuned, and I will see y'all next time. Have a good one, and I'll see you then.